On this track, you'll hear commentary by director Richard Linklater. This interview was recorded in Austin, Texas during the spring of 2004.
I remember feeling like everything outside my life that wasn't cinema was kind of this void, relationships, family connections, everything. It was probably that necessary period where you have to sort of separate yourself from everything you knew before, or as you sort of define yourself as an adult. I have a lot of sympathy for people in their 20s who are sort of wanting to do something different or discover what they're most passionate about or live a life of purpose, or that, they feel like what they're doing with their time is valuable to themselves or the community. If you just go straight to business school and get a job and get married, there's always, that's the typical track, but there's always going to be people who, are looking for something else, or they're having a lengthy existential crisis about what anything means. And I don't know, I've always had a soft spot for that because that was really me. I mean, although I have to say, cinema was the thing that saved me, or that I was always into from age 20 on. I had that kind of focus. What engaged me was film, which is a great thing to fill up your entire life because it encompasses everything. I guess I was motivated on this movie to, I was depicting the life around me, and this is my own house, which is right at 24th Street in Oasis in the heart of West Campus. It's also the house we filmed a couple scenes from the next movie, Slacker, here, and I roomed here with, at this point, Lee Daniel, and had a couple other roommates floated through over the years, Breck Andersch, Dan Cradaville, Eric Lord, a few others, various girlfriends, people always moving in and out. It was one of those houses that our front door never locked. Something was busted with the lock, so we inadvertently had this open door policy. There were always people dropping by 24 hours a day. It was pretty fun for me. It's interesting, the notion of a personal film. Like, while I would call this a personal film, I think it's personal on the interior. Like, on the exterior, this film depicts a guy who's pretty alienated. There's a certain social and familial, disconnect going on. But that wasn't really my life at all, even while I might have felt that. And I think that's what's more important, to depict the accurate interior. On the exterior, had a lot of friends, went out, big group of us were starting the film society. It was all fun, taking a train around the country, meeting a lot of girls. Hey, I was, young, and, everything's great. But some people who knew me pretty well during this period, when they finally saw this film, they really couldn't believe it. Because I had filmed a lot of different things and cut it all out. Things that maybe were a little more exciting or engaging. I cut all that out in the editing. They really couldn't believe it because it seemed so stark, so kind of alienated. Whereas I think they found me not that way at all. I don't know if it's some parallel life you feel like you might be living, or some inner core that you see around you. That's what I think I was getting at. But maybe it was just a part of me, like, had I not been engaged in cinema, if I took that out of my life, then there really was this kind of vacuum. So, but most people don't. Most people fill that vacuum, with something. I was just lucky. For me, it was cinema. I have to say, nothing was, it's easy to look back on something you did so long ago and think, oh, I didn't really put much thought into that. I was really young. But I think you are kind of who you are. That's why I sort of, in a strange way, stand behind this film. I mean, I haven't seen it in so long. Or I went a lengthy time and didn't see it, maybe 7-8 years. And then South by Southwest Film Festival talked me into showing it. And I was thinking, I don't know, I had kind of not thought about this film in a long time and thought it was just an experiment, something I did to teach myself or to try something. But I spent a lot of time on it. I spent a little over 2 years on this film. I watched it again and thought, that's where I was at that time. To be honest, that's where I was, and that's what I could do at that moment, to do a film completely alone. I did it for $3,000 with the Super 8 camera, and I did every element of the film myself and didn't really collaborate with anyone. And that's kind of where I was at personally and in my own film evolution, that's where I was at the time. I look at it kind of quaintly, like, oh, I was actually trying to do something interesting, or at that time, that was all I was doing. I had no plans for other films. I mean, I hoped I would do other films. I had ideas, but I was really testing myself to see if I was even a filmmaker. I'd been making these shorts and had a bunch of ideas about cinema, but my formal skills were just then kind of catching up with some of my ideas. So, I don't know. You always challenge yourself with these things. It enabled me to gain a little confidence and go on and try to do another film. So it was, important to me at the time. So that's why I sort of stand behind the movie now, going, well, it's definitely an early work, but, and it's certainly not for everybody, and I've hardly shown it to anybody ever, but it's, it's what it is at that time, I often joke when people ask if I went to film school. I say, I went to the Stanley Kubrick Film School, which means you just buy a camera and you learn how to use it and you start making movies. And that's as good as anything else. I mean, I lived near the University of Texas Film School, had a lot of friends who went to school there, and I would sit in on classes. I'd go to student film. I was I felt I had some connection there, even though I was never enrolled. I'd go to student short screenings and certainly watched thousands of films on campus. But as far as my own stuff goes, I had a personality. I think I just wanted to do it on my own. I didn't really want to be judged. I was naturally very shy. And what I felt I wanted to do, I knew wouldn't fit into that. I guess I'm always anti-institutional. I've never really gotten along in the academic environment too well. Not that I'm some big radical or anything. It just always kind of bugged me. I felt like there was some kind of, constraints there that I didn't really want to listen to. And I think for film, you don't really need necessarily that. If you're a self-motivated person, which you need to be for film anyway, that's lesson number one. It's not like you get your degree and then the industry gives you this or that. Or, if you're ever really going to write and direct movies and get your own movies made, you have to be, a hustler. You got to be kind of obsessively motivated. School's not going to teach you that or give you those skills. You just kind of have to do it. Damn, I almost forgot about that this guy maybe does or does not shoot somebody. Oh, God. Scary. I'm not a big gun guy. Don't tell that to my neighbors. But I remember going to a gun store and buying this gun. And I never really shot it. But I returned it the next day. But I kind of enjoyed buying the gun. I grew up around guns. I'm not a anti-gun guy actively, but they're just not a big deal in my life anymore. When I talk of this movie in an oblique narrative sense, you might put an input into a movie that makes no sense given anything around it. Give a piece of narrative information and give it no context in the rest of the movie. Or maybe you hint at it at other places. So, but you'll never, it was kind of, I remember thinking it was kind of fun to take a device like this. A gun enters the frame and that's supposed to get everybody all riled up, but to not really ever deliver on that. But it makes you think about this guy. Like, I remember someone, when I showed it at a festival a few years ago, he asked, is that guy a serial killer? Is he like traveling around the country? I was like, it never crossed my mind. I mean, to me, this is like a dream state thing. It may or may not have happened. I think I was obsessed with banality at the time. The nature of this film was anything, a trip to the grocery store or a trip around the country on a train or any element of my life that I was doing. I could find some angle or some shot, something could fit into this film just about the banality of life, like something about whether it was food preparation or shaving. Like, why isn't that ever in film? Like, why? That's the ultimate, rejection of Hollywood structure, I think, is to show someone brushing their teeth or shaving or just see time passing. So that was my ground zero inspiration, I think, was to just reject notions of drama and and explore that a little bit, just to see, like, oh, that's life, that's someone's life. We're all leading, and I've always been obsessed with those kind of details of life, because, I don't know, I think that's where we all reside, and just our own life maintenance and our own, no matter what great things you think you're doing or achieving in the world, you're really just living your life. And I think it's how you approach those elements, that whether you can find joy or meaning in every little thing, or if this is just necessary stuff to get onto the real stuff. I've always been, it's kind of like high and low culture. I've kind of always felt that they're sort of equal, like, I don't know, speaking before the UN is as important as, getting water at your grocery store or whatever. I don't know. It just seems like it's all part of a life, and like how you approach it. If you can find some joy or some poetry or something kind of beautiful about the banal things, then everything else is, then you're much more set, I think, to see the world, What I strive for is to be excited about brushing your teeth, or, all the crap you have to do in life, like, because that is your life. I've always been obsessed with communication, and like human communication, and how we really talk, or the various ways we communicate. And to me, more than alienation, this film's really an attempt at some kind of communication. So, this character kind of disassociated from everything, disconnected, alienated. You can look like that on the surface, but you can be living a really vibrant inner life, in art. So I've always found it interesting when people judge people. Usually it's people close to you, family members, who are like, oh, you're not doing anything. You're going to be a bum like your uncle, or whatever that. They don't know what's going on inside your head. And it's hard to communicate. I think I always saw this movie about communication, or lack thereof, or the impossibility of communication, or the attempt at communication, and primarily a visual experience too. I always thought the film would be not very verbal. I didn't see it as being a very dialogue-intensive film, primarily a visual experience, and with no drama, no real notion of theatrics. I was sort of moved most by, I guess you'd call them structural films of the 70s and 80s, films by, say, James Benning or Chantal Ackerman. At that point in my life, I didn't think, as a filmmaker, I didn't think that would be all I would ever do, but at this moment, that's what I was interested in, and that seemed like something I could attempt to pull off. I love the view out train windows, because you're going through the back of the town. You're seeing, like, pipe yards, and, and it's the industrial parts of town. It's like a much better way to view a city. I remember starting out not with just a feeling like I'm going to take my cues from this trip, and like I was just sort of confident in my ability to be in a situation and find a shot there that would whatever I encountered, I would, deal with in some way in the film, hopefully, and it would grow out of that, and I would discover in the process what the hell I was doing, or what the film wanted to be. I was very open for what this canvas would be, what it would end up being. I didn't have too preset an idea. I was going to give myself time to find it. When I started, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I didn't have anything planned. I've been shooting films for about 3 or 4 years, Super 8 shorts, and a couple 16 millimeter, all experiments, little things that didn't really have any ambition to them outside of technical exercises. I remember starting on this movie thinking I was ready to take on a bigger canvas. I wanted to try to do something in a bigger, for the first time, make something that, had a general theme or feel to it. And I didn't exactly know what that would be when I started, but I was just going on kind of what was happening in front of me, and I thought I could structure something around that. But it would be aspects of, my own life, but not very specific to this character. I thought it'd be interesting to have a lead character that you didn't really even see him very well. He was just kind of in the background. He was just kind of a passing human figure. And I don't know. I mean, it was to make a film about alienation. It was that early idea of that I wanted the viewer to feel alienated. I wanted the viewer to feel not connected. So it's just a, kind of a early idea, I guess. But I wanted the form. It was like a formal experiment of how to communicate that. So to me, it was to communicate that visually. I was a self-taught filmmaker who didn't go to film school, didn't come out of any specific school or had any ideas of making films. Like I was thinking very anti-Hollywood, very anti-film syntax or whatever. And I was very much influenced by like European and, world cinema, much more than American cinema at that moment. As much as I loved films, I think it was just trying to discover your own voice in that. It just didn't feel natural to me to try to be making, a genre piece or something. That's why I think I responded when I saw films that were, structural, primarily, structural challenges and storytelling in a unique kind of oblique, I would say the oblique narrative is the key word. So this was my oblique narrative. There's a story there, but it's very loose, and you have to find yourself in it. And that's a lot to ask of an audience, to give yourself up to something that's not helping you much. But that was where my head was at the time. It was like, you want to make an alienating experience. If you're depicting that, you want to make the film itself kind of, tough to watch maybe, or to test your patience. But I like the idea of people looking at the image, for 2 minutes, sometimes at a time. It was sort of an anti-MTV type film. Obviously, this is, the mid-'80s when, MTV is raging, and this is a complete rejection of all that. And this also comes out of the minimalist school, kind of the structural films of the 70s, and is probably a direct descendant, or a primary influence would be, say, a film like Stranger Than Paradise, which came out in '84, the Jim Jarmusch film. Although this doesn't have the humor or the social interaction that film does successfully with 3 characters, and it's in New York primarily, but this is one guy, traveling around who has these kind of connections, these fleeting connections with other people, seemingly friends and family, but nothing ever gets resolved, or there's no real plot per se, although there might be. I kept it just abstract enough.
Anything particular what I'm doing in Missoula?
No, not really. What was going on? Okay, the character's now in Montana. Missoula, Montana. I have fond memories. My best friend, Frank, was actually going to school there for several years. I just go through there in the summer and hang out. Frank is one of my friends from high school in Huntsville that I've kept up with all these years. He was a Russian studies major, now a professor, Russian. And he gave me the title to this movie within this sequence when he gives me this T-shirt that's in Russian. He gives the translation, so I think that was a further little metaphor on communication, and in that case, translating. Later in the film, when asked what my T-shirt says, I mistranslate it. So one more communication error, I guess. I remember it being a lot of fun to be up in Montana. Missoula, Montana is a fun little town. There's just bars everywhere and people hanging out. So it was a lot like Austin. It's that cool town. Every liberal arts college had, whether it's Athens or Boulder or like Missoula, Austin, every state kind of has one or a few that people drift toward, if you're a musician or you're different in any way. This guy on the right is Dan Cradible. Also, he's from Canada, but I met him in Montana, and he ended up in Austin, and he's in Slacker. He's the guy making, he has 2 appearances in Slacker. He's the guy making the espresso at the very beginning of the movie. And he's also a guy in the Pixel Vision sequence later, so. If you were going to be a friend of mine in this era in my life, you would definitely end up in a movie, or I would put you to work somehow. That just kind of was part of it. This is my early directing of actors, and it seems like nothing, but you are asking a few people to perform, however minimally on camera, but you still have to say, oh, just stand here and read this, and try to create a atmosphere that they could work in. And, you know, it was kind of daunting, as minimal as it seems. I had some scenes in the movie that never made the final movie, that I actually was more actively directing people and trying to get performances and things, and none of it ended up in the movie. I think in this whole movie, no 2 people have any kind of meaningful conversation with one another about anything coming from them. I was obsessed with secondary sources, so we'll read a quote from a book or we'll watch a movie together, but when it's just us talking, it'll be very bland and nothing. But it's easier to communicate through other sources. Like, that's where you could get your meaning across. But at this age, or at this time, it was almost impossible to articulate my own ideas about anything. I remember, not that I've gotten much better, but just being completely inarticulate and sort of, you know, it was very tough to communicate anything very deep. I remember being frustrated. Maybe this whole movie grew out of a certain frustration at verbal communication. In Missoula, they have a mountain there with a big M on the side, so that's a good activity to hike up to the M, you know. So we'd spend, you know, say the afternoon, you hike up to the M. Then in a long shot, I would just turn the camera on and we'd walk away, but then I would have to sprint back to try to save some film. Fortunately, my camera had this wonderful option that you could turn it on and it would wait 10 seconds and then run 20 seconds, or 10 seconds, whichever you pick. So you could hit a button, set a setting, and then that saved me a lot, I could say, but it would limit my shot to 20 seconds maximum. So I would go, okay, this shot shouldn't be more than 20 seconds. 20 seconds is a long time in film, so I would just say, okay, 20 seconds, go. And then, you know, I just get the footage back and know where it cut out, and that's when I would kind of find it. If it was a really valuable shot or I thought it might be longer, I would just let the camera run and then kind of sprint back and turn it off, unless I had acquired a crew member who would turn it off for me. So this is kind of an anticlimax of one of many that they hike to the top, but you never really see their beautiful view. This was very conscious that I would never show, like, oh, this is the beauty of the view when you do hike up there. I would show kind of exhaustion and this big slab they're sitting on. Like, that was more interesting to me. Didn't want to actively pay off anything. I've always been fascinated with what viewers bring to an experience, and I think I've continued, like in films like Waking Life or other films I've done, I've kind of relied on a very active audience that can put things together and find themselves in it and personalize whatever they're watching. I think that's what the human brain does so well. We categorize, we find connections with, given whatever stimuli we're given, and we bring as much emotion or feeling or ideas as we have to it. So you show a painting to somebody, they see nothing, someone else sees a lot. That's what art is, But I think it's important to strive for something, because when you do, as a viewer, you have that experience that someone really challenges you, and you sort of get that challenge, and you come away with more because you've had to work at it. That's primarily the domain of other art forms. Cinema, in general, has a history of laying it out for you, in a way that's satisfying. It works, where you do just enough work, where you're engaged and you feel just enough of a emotional connection to the characters, that it's it can be very satisfying experience. Some films don't give you that, and you're in a whole nother game. And it's kind of fun to see people, floundering around when they don't get anything. This is the only shot I would qualify as a beauty shot because we're up in Glacier National Park, and it is, it's kind of amazing snow. And this is the summer; it's like this all the time. I remember looking at it, thinking, "Oh, this isn't real." It did feel like when you find yourself in a kind of a postcard setting, you go, that doesn't even seem real. So what's much more real is like playing pinball. In doing this movie, I did 2 trips up to Montana, one summer and one the next. That was kind of the beginning and ending of my filming. I had edited in the interim year and shot a bunch of other stuff, and I thought of things that I could get.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. Yeah, Pops, you could take care of a whole room full of people with that gun.
While I was on my trip, reading the occasional paper, I saw an obit for Sterling Hayden, who was one of my favorite actors, always. So I put in this little homage. I think this was ripped off from Alice in the Cities when young Mr. Lincoln is playing on TV. And it's a kind of an homage to John Ford. It just passed, I think. So I have the killing going in the background. Sterling Hayden's trying to convince Timothy Carey to come aboard his scheme and shoot a horse. And the horse in the big racetrack robbery. One of many great Sterling Hayden scenes. He's really wonderful in that movie, but I always loved him. I have a lot of sympathy for filmmakers making their first films because it's so much work to pull it together. You're kind of finding out what you don't know, which is endless. It's hard to be a leader. It's hard to communicate with people. I cut so much of that out of my dialogue altogether. Like, okay, I can't communicate with anyone about my own ideas. So I'm going to just do this film alone. I don't want to even deal with anybody. I don't want to explain anything to anyone. I don't know how to even talk to anyone about what I'm thinking. So I'm just going to do this alone and see what happens. There were some filmmakers I liked quite a bit who had done that more or less. So I thought, okay, well, that's challenge number 1. I'll do every technical element of this movie. I'll shoot it, light it where necessary. I'd like to not light too much. I'll obviously edit it. I'll do the soundtrack. I'll do everything. I'll do, whatever sound work, everything about it. So that was a nice little crash course in filmmaking. Just that all these years later, I consider and go, well, yeah, I can, I can do all these things. I really can. I can record sound. I can, it's not my forte. It's not what I enjoy doing, but I can do, having done it a lot. Everything, that you kind of go into something confident. You know what everybody you're working with is up against. So, the value of well-recorded sound when you've spent a year kind of looping or trying to make something work better. I'm talking about my first 2 films here. So, it was a nice technical challenge for myself, and also it was kind of fun going through life thinking, okay, I'm working on something bigger. How, and to be engaged in a work in an ongoing process. And I shot this primarily over about a 1-year period. My film background to that point, this is age, 20-ish, 1920-ish, was really sketchy. I grew up going to, you see a lot of movies just like the way all kids do, but there was only one theater in town and a new movie would come there every week. One week it'd be The Cowboys, the next week, it's Evel Knievel, the next week it's Judge Roy Bean, I remember these movies, The Getaway, every week there'd be one new movie in town. It'd play for 1 week, and usually we saw it. So it was always fun, but they were just, films just showed up from who knows where, and you liked most of them, and the idea that you could ever make a film. This is a little town in East Texas. It's very different now. I think the culture is much more media savvy, and everyone kind of there's some superstar directors, everybody kind of knows what a film director does, and everyone's got a video camera, but this is a whole nother era where, I didn't even know what a director was until I was, I think, well into my teens. Hitchcock. Everybody knew who Alfred Hitchcock was, but I didn't know what he did necessarily. You know, he was somehow responsible for like The Birds, you know, or Psycho, films like that. And then one day, I'd seen some films from Austin. One was, I think, a graduate student film called The Speed of Light by the late Brian Hansen, and another was called The Invasion of the Aluminum People by the late David Boone. Two Austin filmmakers who I never got to know. They had moved and were gone before I ever got to know them, or moved, or, you know, I never met them. But they were kind of the generation ahead of me. And they were in and around, I believe, you know, University of Texas. But I saw, you know, they were, you know, like 30-minute-ish type films shot on. One was in Super 8 and one was in 16. And I remember thinking, like, wow, you know, like, I guess you can make, you know, there were people making films in Austin. And, you know, I thought maybe I'd go there and get into the school there, you know, which I didn't eventually end up doing, but I remember thinking, and Austin's a cool town in the South that you escape to anyway. So I had friends going to college there, and I'd go up and visit, and I was like, yeah, Austin seems like the place. I mean, it's not like a big film center or anything at that time, but it was primarily a music town, but it just seemed like a cool place to be. There were a lot of young people hanging out, and I thought, well, that's as good a place. You got to live somewhere. You know, I just moved to Austin and had my film equipment and just started making films, and eventually, you know, started meeting people. I met Lee Daniel at a film club meeting called the Heart of Texas Film Makers. It's this little group that worked out of the Ritz Theater, run by the guy Austin Jarnigan. And we all just, you know, would watch each other's films or talk about film, or there was always some vague plan about maybe making a bigger film. And, you know, I don't know. At that point, I had definite ideas, I felt, about films I wanted to make, or I was kind of reaching for, but, you know, it was still a few years off. But it was pretty good experience to meet some kind of kindred spirits, you know, one way or another. Lee Daniel was I think he was finishing up film school at that point. He was in his last year. He had made an interesting short with two other people called Late Air that I saw looked great, kind of an interesting semi-experimental, like black and white film. And we just started talking. We had a kind of a common bond about certain kind of films. And I don't know, we just started hanging out. He was projecting films for a band, Texas Instruments, that I would kind of join in and help project films, I mean, multiple projector screenings. And it was just fun. It was like, wow, you know, Austin music. There were bands playing every night. There was all these interesting young people. Most people were musicians or artists of some kind. Not that many film people. But we were definitely in the minority at that time. But yeah, Austin just was kind of the place. A year or so after I moved here, I, you know, started, you know, wanting to see more films. I was watching 3 films a day, and then there were certain directors I wanted to see more work of, and the Austin Film Society kind of grew out of that. Started showing a lot of movies from directors. You know, you want to see more Bergman films than just The Seventh Seal and Wild Strawberries. You know, where's all the other films? You want to see more experimental films or documentaries or kind of cult films. And this was before everything was on video. So there was this great need, and I was lucky to fall in with some like-minded friends who, you know, we all were sort of, you know, raging with the ideas of film. And, you know, it was just a great period in my life. You know, myself, roommates, Lee Daniel, had a roommate, Brecht Anders, and, you know, it was just, film was it, you know. In a music town like Austin, we were the film guys. And there was a circle around us of people who kind of came and went, usually living in our house. You know, it was just a really kind of an exciting time. Like a whole world had opened up. And I'll never forget it. It was just, you know, I just would spend all my time reading about film or, you know, watching movies. And, you know, that's just what we did. We showed films and promoted them and talked about films and went to every film. And that was life. It was pretty damn great. I remember actually, like, this is actually me hitchhiking. I had to get from, you know, I would find myself, the train went here, the bus went here, and the train starts there, and, you know, you got 15 miles to cover. So you just hitchhike. And of course, I had my own gear, but then I also had bags, you know, a camera, a tripod, film stock. You know, I was also a small traveling mini film crew. As I, you know, exposed film, I would, you know, try to mail it pretty soon. Yeah, I think that's why I'm all kind of saddled down with these bags. I guess as a kid, I always thought I was going to be a writer. You know, I was always the kid who, you know, won the writer's fair or wrote some weird short story. 5th grade on, I always thought I'd be a writer. But just because I was living in some little town in East Texas that I really had no other outlets, you know, I didn't, and certainly you never thought, you weren't encouraged to think you could do that for a living. If you said, oh, I want to be a writer, it was like, well, you could be a journalist, you know, maybe you could make a living as a, you know, I was kind of an athlete too, so, oh, maybe you'd be a sports writer, you know. That was all, you know, that was the highest ambition, you know, you could kind of reach for. So, which I didn't, I always thought was kind of stupid. I wanted to write, you know, novels or something like that. It was in college that I kind of discovered theater. I started reading a lot of plays and hanging out with some, just peripherally. I was never like a drama major. I was an English major, or taking mostly English classes, but literature. But I started, there was an English class at my school that was playwriting. I thought that'd be interesting, so I wrote several one-act plays, and, you know, you study playwrights, and that was, I found that thrilling. That was in my 2nd year of college, and I started getting to know some of the people in the drama department, and I just thought that was wonderful, just the kind of artistic troupe. They'd putting on plays, and they'd do musicals, and it was just kind of fun to watch, to sort of be around. And I had written a play that, had I returned to school, they would have performed, which I think I was afraid of, actually, looking back. I'd written this one-act play that I thought was pretty good, but I was kind of, I guess I was running from something. Anyway, I didn't go back to school that next year, and it was around that time my writing ambitions, after seeing that same sophomore year, as I was getting into theater, I'd seen Raging Bull. I remember that opened, and I remember just thinking, like, wow. And then I started, through my English classes, you know, every English professor is also a amateur film critic. They would show, this is when videos were just becoming a thing in the early 80s. They would, once a week, they'd show a movie, like Clockwork Orange or something, and I would go. And, you know, we'd talk about the film after. So I started thinking, I was just doing a segue into thinking about film, and so I was thinking, oh, maybe I could write films. Like, that seemed interesting. Like, film had sort of taken hold of me as worth my time, you know, like, it just was a matter of seeing masterpieces and, you know, interesting films that I'd never seen before. I just hadn't been exposed to them. And I quickly started going to the library and checking out books on the French New Wave, or I would go home and, you know, I'd reference like a director or a studio, a writer, actors. I was just kind of, you know, just interested. But I was kind of pouring through it all in my own academic way, studying everything that I had seen, or I was just kind of devouring everything around me, I guess, looking back, to do with like the history of film and, you know, different national cinemas. And I remember I had one book that I'd gotten through a book club or something. It was sitting there on my shelf, and it was called The Technical Aspects of Filmmaking. And I'd look at it fairly regularly. I'm like, okay, I'm going to wait for you. I'm not going to read you just yet. I'm going to do another year of history, you know, film history. And I was doing my own version of film appreciation.
A choice of coffee, hot or iced tea, or milk as a beverage. I also have an a la carte selection, including apple and cherry pie for dessert, cheesecake and carrot cake, vanilla ice cream, as well as beer, light wine, Coca-Cola.
There's very little verbal communication in the movie, but there's a lot of words. I remember when you're traveling by train, they're always making these announcements, and the conductors, I mean, everybody's kind of bored, so they'll talk at length, and I remember being kind of amused. So I was always recording what these guys were saying. And some of it's just the menu, but some of it's kind of colorful stuff. So I thought that was where we would have actual dialogue from the movie would be more contained in things we hear elsewhere. Like he does at the very beginning, that sets this quote-unquote story going, is the tape he gets from his friend, vaguely inviting him up there. You know, we get a sense that this guy's not going to go to school this year, or he's blowing off school, and, what the hell, jump on a train, travel up to wherever, you know, Montana. I think this is the shot like this, the rattling 7-Up can. When you have all day and you just kind of study, like, I mean, it was just kind of interesting. I like the way it sounded, you know. You got this slight little rumble on the train that rattle everything. It just seemed worthy of being in the movie. A lengthy shot. You know, it was the kind of movie you could just put that kind of shot into. I remember finding shots in this kind of like a photographer. You know, you'd find verticals, and there's a, you know, elevator in the background, and you're like, okay, that's interesting visually. You know, it's like I said, so much of what I've done since then is so character-based, so narrative-driven, that, you know, it's really more about the character. You take your cues from that than the image. Where this was just the opposite. I think it's the only time I've ever approached a film that way, and maybe the only time I ever will. This movie, it's impossible to learn to plow by reading books. I would consider in my own world like my graduate thesis. I had made all these undergraduate films just on my own. You know, they're not even experiments. I call them technical experiments. I'd made a lot of films. I'd do a whole film just for editing, or a whole film just for lighting or camera movement. You know, I'd get a friend to push me in a dolly, or, you know, I was just, you know, trying to, you know, just learn all the elements of filmmaking. They were just technical exercises. I was amazed looking back how much patience I had to not crave immediate results. I knew they wouldn't be forthcoming. I knew enough about the history of film and studying filmmakers' lives that it wasn't something that just came overnight. There's not really prodigy filmmakers in the way there are in, you know, in music and other art disciplines. It's kind of so all-encompassing. It's rare you see a young filmmaker. I mean, there's a lot of young filmmakers, and a lot of young people obviously, you know, achieved a lot in film. But I don't know. I knew I wouldn't be one of those. I knew that I was coming to it late. It just wasn't going to be. But I'm thankful for my background now, that I wasn't a guy at 9 years old who knew he wanted to make films and was filming blowing up his train set. And I never came at it from that. I came at it more. Literature, philosophy, theater was kind of my background before I discovered cinema. So I was always kind of coming at it from more of a theoretical standpoint, without being a, you know, semiotician or an academic, because I'm far from that. I'm fairly inarticulate. I'm not, you know, I'm an autodidact, which means I can't pronounce certain European people's names correctly. I'm really sketchy on my own education. It's all just been my own reading, and so I don't feel like I've, you know, I'm kind of splotchy when it comes to the academia, but, you know, it's been my own subjective path, that has its own merits too. Whatever gaps it leaves you, at least you know your own learning has been yours. You know, it's been, this is what I was interested in, here's a filmmaker I really liked, and here's who he liked, and they taught me this, and I went from there to there, and here's a writer I liked who, you know, so, you know, you're on your own subjective learning path. There's no overnight success. There's no idiot savant filmmakers. There's no, you know, it's not going to work like that. It's a lot of work, and people don't want to hear that. They want to think, oh, you just did it. Wow. It's like Harry Potter. Remember when J.K. Rowling, they figured, oh, she was on The Dole. Oh, well, she's been writing since she was a kid, you know. They want to think, oh, I could be on The Dole. Maybe I could be a best-selling writer. It's like, no, you probably can't. So, yeah, no one wants to think how they would have to alter their life, you know, because by the time, say, Slacker came out, I could honestly say I've put in more time in the last 9 years or whatever into cinema than anyone could, you know. 20 hours, 18 hours a day, my whole life, every day, for all those years was 100% devoted to cinema. You know, all my own projects, things I was working on, watching movies, reading, you know, that was my crash course over many, many years. So, you know, I crammed in a lot in those years. So in some way, you know, it's kind of insulting when you're sort of treated, every actor, everybody who's ever gotten to some level, you're treated like the overnight success, but you in your heart know that's not the case. You see these films and you go, wow, that's really great what they're doing. And then you think, well, you know, in a way, that seems accessible. Like I can get a 16 millimeter camera and maybe I can do that. And I was, you know, flattered years later when people come up to me and say Slacker was that film to them. They saw Slacker and thought, oh, I can do that too. Which is, I mean, it's a compliment, sometimes a backhand compliment, by saying, oh, if you can do that, you know, it's not that impressive, I can do that too, you know. So it's Kevin Smith talks about that. You know, like people see Clerks and, well, boy, shit, man, I can't do any worse than, you know, technically than that. But what they can't do is write dialogue like that quite often, or there's always something beyond that makes it a little more difficult than the viewer thinks. The biggest misconception is people see someone's first film and they think that's what they did on their first day as a filmmaker. So when people were treating me like when I did Slacker, like I just picked up a camera 5 minutes before, I always was really insistent on telling them, no, I've been doing this for a long time, actually. I did a Super 8 feature before this. I've done, you know, I have a closet full of shorts. I've been at this, you know, years and years at this point. This is a woman who was we were both stuck in an airport all night. Like I was getting picked up the next morning and my plane had arrived, so I had 6 hours to kill in the airport. It's amazing when you don't have money. Like nowadays, I would get in a cab and go stay in a hotel, a cheap hotel somewhere by the airport. But at that point, that's just not an option in your life. You know, why would you waste $39, you know, for 6 hours of your life? What's your time and comfort worth? So you end up with like-minded folks waiting, and you tend to drift together and you just spend a night talking until you both fall asleep. I remember this woman I met, she had just moved to LA that night. She was getting picked up the next morning. She had moved there had a job cutting hair, and that had kind of taken her to LA. And we ended up talking all night, and then she did fall asleep. This is actual documentary style. She is really asleep there, and I set up the camera, and I did write her a long note. And just said, you know, it was great hanging out. Good luck with stuff. Whatever. I was heading out. And, and I always, you know, always wonder what happened to her. They have a theme from Cats going in the background, too. I like that. I didn't put that in later. That was actual. I remember as I was doing this scene, you get these wonderful little chance moments that I was like, oh shit, turn on the camera. They've got that stupid song from Cats going and music in the background. So I remember thinking like, oh, the film gods are with me on that one. That's not true. I don't think that's a stupid song from Cats. I was always actually moved by that song. I know you're supposed to be, but I actually was. Because I did every element of this movie myself, it necessitated leaving the camera behind me. If my character's walking away from the camera, I would hit the button on the camera and walk away, which is like leaving your expensive camera on a tripod back behind you, which gets kind of dangerous at times. I often would collect a little crew. Inevitably, when you're setting up a tripod and a camera and maybe a microphone, someone will wander over and say, hey, what are you doing? What's this? And you just say, hey, you want to help me? You know, here, hit this button, do that. I remember on the train acquiring a crew of bored kids. This caught a good trek, you know, from across the southwestern United States. These kids were with me a day or two. No kid over 9 years old, but they were great. They carried equipment. They saved me a lot of film stock by turning on the camera when I asked them to, when I would be far away or something. So. It's funny how looking at kind of the backgrounds, knowing so much of that looks the same, these days. Nothing much changes, like in how those industrial sections look too much. The only thing that's really different in what's coming up on 20 years is the cars. You see cars, and that really hits you. The train cars look the same. Almost everything's the same. I remember thinking about the composition of like every shot to this movie, and often, dealing in Super 8, you're with the kind of a 1:3:3 frame, similar to it's not widescreen anyway, but being not really, or kind of actively challenging that frame. Like that's the freedom you do have in cinema, is to kind of expand beyond the boundaries of whatever frame you've been given. I remember kind of thinking a lot like that in these days. It's something you learn when you study cinema, like the way Eisenstein used angles, of within the frame in something like, say, Potemkin in a lot of his movies. It's something you learn theoretically, but you often don't really, you see a lot of meaning in it, or you're taught a lot of meaning, but you don't really necessarily think that way. And always kind of looking, it's just being much more conscious of compositions. And it's the kind of film where you sort of have to be, but it wasn't random. I didn't just plunk down a tripod anywhere. I would really find the shot. I think I remember consisting on a diet of granola bars, peanuts, sodas. I don't eat any of those things anymore, hardly. I think my favorite shot in this movie, it was kind of continuous, is like this with the wall right in front of your face. You're looking out a window. You expect to see the beautiful vista of the country, and what you really get is a warehouse in your face, kind of blocking your view. They all look the same too, but it was like my favorite thing, like just a big fat brick wall or a metal building. I kind of kept returning to that over and over. Also a challenge on train travel is like, how do you sleep? I mean, certain seats go back farther and better than others. Finding like a comfortable seat. I mean, if you have any money, you get one of those sleeper cars, but when you've got nothing, I remember the all-aboard excursion fare. It was like $200, and for 45 days, I could travel anywhere in like half the United States. You can travel as much as you want, but you can only get off, I think, 3 times. So I picked Montana, San Francisco, and Los Angeles as my 3, just because I had places to stay, relatives, friends. I think often the most interesting view out of train is the back window. You go to the very back car because you can see a full 180 view, out the back, and something kind of poetic as you leave, because you can't really see out the front of the train. That's not really possible because that's the engines and the conductors and all that. But the back is yours, and that's interesting because it's what's behind you now. It was always a challenge on the train to try to find 2 seats together. Sometimes when it'd be really crowded, you have to sleep, 3 inches away from some stranger. Looking out a train window, it's always interesting. In the image, you've got foreground objects, whisking by, wiping the frame, and then a far background objects that stay fairly constant. These doors, this must be some primordial thing from my watching Get Smart as a kid or something, where the doors open and close behind you, and I wanted to do one where it shut right on my face and I grabbed my nose or something, but it wasn't that kind of movie, I guess. So this is sort of the last leg of the trip through the southwestern part of the country. That's a great little trip on the Amtrak, from like LA to San Antonio or Austin. It's like it has an official name, but I forget it. But it's like a popular route. People were always like playing guitars and having a good time on that one. As much as anything else in the film, I wanted to depict kind of the exuberance of travel, even though it's not depicted in that way. you're very alive when you're traveling. That's I think the addictive quality of traveling. Things take on a more resonant meaning. Everything's new to you. You're very alive. I shot this movie on Super 8. I probably shot about 10 hours of footage and transferred it all to video, just sort of myself, and then edited at the cable access place here in Austin, ACTV, for about a year of editing, which kind of eventually drove them crazy because you're supposed to edit, make shows, and then air them. And I spent over a year editing this and hadn't aired anything. Finally, toward the end, it's like, hey, you've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours here and you've never aired anything? I'm like, I will. So eventually, I showed this whole movie on Access, but I had the lowest broadcast ratio to editing time in history. I remember editing this movie really in my head, since there was no cutting in between scenes. I mean, within the scene there was no editing ever. It was always one take, one scene. And I got to know the footage pretty well just by watching it over and over. So I would just kind of play with it on paper. I did most of my editing kind of on paper, just in my head, on these note cards, and then I would go into this ACTV and then actually do the real editing. It's my old Mazda that I had at that time. That's what's kind of neat. You revisit an old car. Girlfriend of mine wrecked it about a year after this. When I was editing this movie, I had to take a job. I took a job as a night bellman at a hotel, which I call a warm body job, because it was just they needed someone there in case anything happened at night. So I actually got paid $5 an hour or whatever to do things I would be doing, at home anyway, reading, writing, stuff like that, writing letters, whatever was going on. So I'd only work about 2 hours a night. But in my 2 off hours, since I was on a night schedule, I would edit at ACTV those 2 nights from 11 to 7. I would just schedule editing time, and they'd lock me in the building at ACTV, and I'd just stay there all night editing. So my schedule was spoken for every night of the week for about a year, 11 to 7. But that was really all I needed, those two nights a week. Eventually my night bellman job went away. They just did away with it when they realized I wasn't really doing much. I was only working about 45 minutes a night usually. I accidentally blabbed to a regional manager who didn't identify himself as such. When I picked him up at the airport, he's like, "How do you like your job?" And I was like, "Oh, it's great. I hardly do anything." I thought he seemed only a little older than me, kind of a cool guy. And so I told him basically I didn't do anything, and my yellow slip arrived about 2 weeks later. So I asked him what he did. "I'm regional manager, and we're gonna..." So that was that. Someone pointed out, this is most embarrassing, "Oh, you're walking around with your shirt off all the time." And I was like, yeah, I guess that is kind of embarrassing, but we lived in a house with no AC. It's like 104 degrees in there. That's just the way we dressed, It's like you wear cutoffs. That's Texas in the summer. You wear cutoffs or you just kill yourself in no shirt if you're a guy. A lot of women don't even wear clothes hardly. It's so fucking hot. So that was, I was never, but it is weird to see yourself like walking around without your shirt on. It's just kind of embarrassing to see yourself because I'm not an actor, but I had no other way to make this movie. I didn't want to have an actor. That would have been a real drag to carry some guy around the country with me. I just didn't know how to do that. But I thought I could do it just because he's pretty abstract almost. I didn't really have in mind a character per se. It was just this guy, kind of mumbling guy, and I thought, oh, I could do that. That's kind of what... I would hate to have a real person and ask him to do what I was doing, because it's nothing, it's more symbolic than a real person.
Favorite job in the world? Washing fucking dishes.
My friend Frank and I had this long history of sending tapes to one another. It was great, phone calls when you have the no budget, a 10-minute long-distance phone call. That's half your grocery budget for that week or whatever, so that's kind of prohibitive. So I remember we'd just send these tapes, but they were also kind of therapy. He gave me a box of tapes I'd sent him over the years, and I have some that he had sent me. Just kind of free associate, think, ask a question and not expect a reply for a week or two whenever you get around to recording, sending another tape back. I never really filmed myself making tapes. You get this impression I've made a tape, but you never really hear his thoughts. You don't get that. You don't get him talking about what's going on with him. So the oblique protagonist continues to the very end, I think, here. Again, all this boring life maintenance, all the teeth brushing and shower taking, and I think I got all that out of my system. I don't have to put that in movies anymore. Oh, this was funny. We'd park in this lot and just get a stack of tickets on our cars. Sort of one of these nasty neighborhoods where every time you did something you got a ticket, or you could just feel the strong arm of the law. Because this wasn't at all a residential neighborhood. We were the only people actually living in this area. And so it's almost like you can feel the force. They don't want you there. They're towing your car. They're getting tickets. You're getting hassled. A roommate of mine, Brecht, he wasn't in school, and he was getting all these university tickets. He just let them stack up on his car. Every day he'd get a ticket. He was wearing it like a badge of honor. Then one day they towed his car, and to get it back, he thought they had no jurisdiction or anything over him because he wasn't in school, but that school towed his car. And to get it back, he had to pay like about $400 in tickets for a car that's worth $800, so it's that ongoing poor tax. Of course, that one had a little attitude to it. So this whole thing was kind of a little trip to Houston. I had relatives at the time who lived in Houston. I was always having to go there, so there was this one girl I was kind of vaguely going out with in Houston, so that would be my only redeeming thing. When in Houston, I could go hang out with Aaron a little bit.
What's going on? Yeah, I'm in town for a little while.
So this is about as much as you hear this character say the whole movie. He's sitting here in shadow, talking on the phone. But I think it's kind of funny that he can be more articulate on the phone than in person. There's very little dialogue. There were scenes in this that I didn't want you to hear anything. And then there's others that, obviously, the vast majority of the dialogue I do want you to hear, but just the point is that it's really not about much. It's kind of, they're sort of living through secondary sources, whether they're watching movies, or there's music in the background, or there's other means of communication. Like the most emotional moments to me in this movie they're secondary. There's like a film, they're watching a film on TV or at the theater. To me, that's more expressive than anything in their lives. And that's how art can actually be, like that it expresses more than you ever could at a certain time. So although maybe everything's interior, it's still very difficult to engage or to express. And yet we're social beings, I mean, you look at this lead character, I mean, he seems to be, he's not, he's doing everything you should do. He's visiting friends, he's family, he's traveling around, he's got, there's some kind of community around him. He's not, living in a hole in the ground. Remember on certain shots, just, waiting for the sun to be just perfect when the shadows hit. I really did. I mean, looking at this movie, I really did put that kind of time into the image making, like going out the right time with the light, or, I mean, you have to do that always. This movie I just did, it was all about the sun, what the natural light gives you. But I remember kind of trying as much as possible in this movie to not light. Often you'd have to put a photo flood into a practical situation, but I was always kind of wanting to use natural light. I mean, that's a pretty primal film notion, I think. And you can pull it off only so far. So, I love the natural light. This is my grandmother's house, a condo she lived in. As alienated as I was from everything in my 20s, I remember I was lucky to come from a very nice family that didn't give me too much shit. I mean, there's subtle hostilities about me not doing anything with my life, but I don't think they gave me, I wasn't asking them for any money, I guess, but I don't know. I was lucky to live in a tolerant atmosphere of a town like Austin, where it's okay to be a grad student until you're 40 or whatever. You have 380 hours of school and not have graduated because you were lacking one requirement or something. You can just sort of hang out in coffee shops and, have a little job, a TA or, whatever, and live your life. But family pressure is worse usually than societal pressure, as we all know. And I feel pretty blessed that a few people, even though I was officially a college dropout and was underachieving and had nothing to show for myself through most of my 20s, that they were kind of like, oh, well, you're doing what you want. My mom and grandmother especially, I remember thinking they were cool. Dad had to be a little more like, well, you should kind of maybe think about getting back in school. Just that kind of friendly advice about subtly getting your act together. And a career in the arts wasn't really a very plausible or practical goal, and it's not. But I remember not caring, It's like I was content to live in a hole, read, watch movies, and, get money wherever you could get it. To date, I've made 10 films, including this one, and I'm kind of happy that I have kind of a pleasant relation with everything, even though sometimes it's fraught with some tension around the edges, or certain productions are harder than others, and every film has its own cross to bear, certainly. I accept them. I accept it. I don't fight with it. I don't mind. After, you might go 8 years and not watch something. I guess there's an embarrassing aspect, in this film, that's an issue with me because I'm the guy in the movie, even though he's a nameless character and you don't see much of him. So, all told, I would say this film's only like 20% embarrassing or whatever. That's why I agreed to even let anyone ever see it. So, it's where I was at the time. This is for completists, people who want to see everything. I'm sort of like that too. I like to see certain directors' early work, and if you do like what they're about, we do that with music, the basement tapes kind of idea of someone's recording sessions. If you're a fan and you really kind of like them in general, sometimes it's interesting to put things together and see pieces of future, later works. I know filmmakers who kind of actively dislike their own films and never look at anything. Like, I can look at a film, and I guess I'm like this with myself, and just sort of accept the flaws of it. And whatever's embarrassing about it, or whatever you didn't pull off, I can go, well, that's just, I did my best, at the time. That's where I was at, that was what I was dealing with. If I had to pick a favorite scene in the movie, I think in some strange-ass way, this one might be the driving in the car toward downtown Houston. I just like the texture, of the day. It's kind of this gray, almost rainy day. Flipping through radio stations. I think this was before they even had scan buttons. Or this model car. You were always reaching for something. And it's just like a nice little collage of sounds coming out. There are different songs of all kinds, and the background's changing. I was happy with the way this came out. I have a scene later where I'm flipping through the TV stations in the same way. It's kind of fun when you're doing that. It's sort of, you're the mix, you're the DJ, looking for the right segue, the right beat, the right moment to switch, to hang on. Is it substantial enough to stay on? Should you get going? Your order is to keep moving, so it's just picking. So it's kind of fun. I don't know what that's a metaphor for. Being completely dissatisfied with anything coming at you, or nothing coming at you is going to really fulfill you, even a good song. Here's the Pretenders, for God's sake. Why did I not sit and listen to the rest of that song? There was Bonnie Raitt earlier. I never much worried about rights, because on my first couple films, I didn't own Slacker either, just thinking, no one's ever going to want to watch this film, or it has no future anyway, so why should I care, Always giving people permission to put clips of anything they wanted from me, or do a mixtape, or do some kind of rap version over some dialogue from a movie of mine, I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever, because I don't know, I just think that's the modern world we're living in, you know? I'm all for like less copyright control and more free access to pre-existing, you know, information and art. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm a situationist in that regard. It's very frustrating when you're making a bigger budget movie, like say with a studio. It's just everything's legal. Oh, you've got a little picture in the background. Oh, you got to get the artist who made that little magazine cover. You know, just everything is copyright. It's exhilarating when you see a documentary that can argue social, either satire or fair use in a documentarian way. But if you're doing a narrative film, just every element, they just assume you have complete control over every element of your, you know, frame. You have to have rights for everything. I remember big films I saw that motivated me. You know, you see all the masterpieces, but you don't see Grand Illusion and think, oh, I'm going to go do that. You're kind of humbled before a film like that. But what you do see that motivates you is something like Return of the Secaucus 7 or Chan is Missing. Or there was also a film that really motivated me called The Last Night at the Alamo by the late Linkl Pinnell, a really wonderful Texas filmmaker who passed away a couple years ago. Done dialogue intensive, done for a very low budget. I think these kind of backyard, I'll call them like backyard movies, done by filmmakers on a low budget, kind of usually in their own stomping grounds. You know, like Return of the Secaucus 7 feels like it's John Sayles' college reunion. You know, these are people he knows well, and primarily a dialogue-driven movie, but character pieces. You know, Chan is Missing, Wayne Wang's early film. Like a $20,000 film made in San Francisco in Chinatown, which is, you know, it's a wonderful little film. That's Sterling Hayden, by the way. I don't even know what the movie this is. But I thought, as I was flipping the stations, I was like, oh, cool, Sterling is back in the movie from The Killing earlier. My homage to him earlier, so I hung on that one longer. I remember this particular little trip. I was staying at my mom's house. She had to be away. Her dog had just had a bunch of puppies. And I think I was the one in the family to call, like, hey, can you come? I'm out of town for 3 days or 4 days. Can you come stay and just watch the house? And I'll be like, okay, you know, what the hell. This is my hometown of Huntsville, Texas, where my mom was living at the time. And a friend of mine, actually James Benning, that filmmaker, he teaches at Cal Arts, one of my favorite filmmakers. This was his favorite scene. Just all the little dogs, little puppies with their tails. Like, but that was my only chore. Feed the dogs, make sure they had water. You can lounge around. If you're content to just read your life, which I would have been maybe, you can go pretty far. There's people out there who just need someone to kind of house sit and take care of the minor things in their really busy life. If you can just kick back and take care of those and don't mind, you know, you can. There's a lot of neat little gaps in this world where you can survive, you know. I remember in this era, that was I had a good, like, working method, you know, toward life, like how to get the most for the least, you know. I lived near University of Texas, went to films on campus. We would, like, counterfeit, you know, the movie passes. We would sneak in. Everybody helped each other out at the no money level. Like, everyone's sort of helping each other. Yeah, faking hand stamps and getting on guest lists to shows. And, you know, if someone has a job at a restaurant, you sneak them food. And, you know, just that kind of support society that grows up in the American underclass. So, I always enjoyed that kind of vibe, you know, like, or you sort of need it, you know, you help where you can help and you're in turn helped. So, I don't know, I like depicting that, and that was in Slacker, certainly. That was a big vibe of that movie. But this is the biggest bone is things like car problems. There's nothing you can do, you know, when something fucks up with your car, unless you're a mechanic, which I'm not. You know, you just do without your car. If you can scrounge the $130 to fix it, then you just, I don't know, it just feels really taxing. There's a few things you just, rent, however cheap. My rent was $133 a month, all bills paid, to live in that house. And still, that was the challenge. If you could make the rent, you never have a car payment, of course, but just keep your car operating, you could live on about maybe $250, $300 a month at the most.
Hvem er du egentlig?
Jeg er mange forskellige.
Hvem?
This is a clip from Gertrude, the Dreyer movie, his last movie from '64, which I don't know if it's my favorite Dreyer movie. Certainly one of my top 3, I would say. But I remember this passage. I like this passage quite a bit.
Jeg er månen.
And I guess it ties in. It was something about dreams. And, arguably there's certain elements of this movie that are dreamy. And I, years later, made a film that was all about that, waking life. So I guess that was with me early on. But, as you think about consciousness and, what the fuck we're perceiving, that, I don't know, movies are in there somewhere too. So I've always seen that as a big, wonderful jumble, between like life, dreams, and movies. There's kind of in there somewhere is all this. So
Lang kæde af drømme, der glider over i hinanden.
and I guess this is an homage also to My Life to Live, the Godard film, where they watch, in that movie, they're watching Dreyer's Joan of Arc.
Også
Anna Karenina starts crying when that, but no tears in this movie. Or liking the stairway, there's kind of those signs just have nothing on them. I remember seeing this going, that's kind of beautiful. You're coming out of a movie, but it's almost like there's no movie playing there. It's a big empty white box. I remember these stairs, as you hit the last one, the stairs would just kind of retract up. I remember thinking that was kind of pretty, beautiful. It's so funny, I still walk by these locations. I don't live far from that very location now, about 2 blocks from it. I walk by every now and then and just get a whiff of, God, I filmed a scene here, 19 years ago or something. I used to go to events and imagine I had a gun on me. I don't know why. Like I was going there to kill somebody. I don't know why. It was kind of weird to just kind of wander into a public event like I was, fucking John Hinckley or something. That guy who got on the elevator there is a friend of mine, Scott Van Horn, who shows up as a grease monkey in one of the auto mechanics in Slacker. I always wonder what happened to this T-shirt. I wore it for a long time.
Hey, what does your shirt say?
Frank was a member of a Russian club, and he gave me this T-shirt up there.
It's Russian. I don't. I can't really pronounce it, but it means in Russian, you can't learn to plow by reading books. Old Russian. Oh, what's that book?
This scene has showed by itself because the guy asking me about my shirt and giving me his tape here is none other than Daniel Johnston. Our house was on his path back then in 85, 86. The great singer-songwriter. Kind of one of my most, I guess, inspiring Austin characters I've ever encountered. And pretty early on, too. Daniel would give away his music. He worked at McDonald's, give away songs. So I was always impressed with that. He would walk around, or if he thought you were interesting, he'd put one of his tapes in your bag of hamburgers or whatever and give it to you. And he was always handing out tapes, always for free. But he was featured in a short film I made before this called Woodshock that Lee and I did. The day I met him, he handed us a tape, which is, really a great, it was Hi, How Are You was the album he was giving out on that day. But I got received all of his music. And that's what we're listening to here, his tape. But I like this kind of another guy sort of communicating by tape out there who's inarticulate in person, but actually is expressing himself with his music. He's obviously living in a little room somewhere and making these kind of lo-fi productions. And yet that was his communication, you know, to me in that chance encounter. His songs are these kind of broken down, sometimes heartsick, sometimes depressive ballads, you know. But they're often very life-affirming too, so I've always just loved his music. And his recent stuff is really great too, so Daniel's always been great. One of those touched individuals who's just another guy you would run into in Austin. I remember thinking he's just like a really special artist.
Thursday night, I put the cassette in and...
This is a friend of mine, Tammy Gomez, who just a friend from this period. She came by my house and was telling me all this stuff. And I was like, oh, here, hold on, let me film this. You want to be on the film? She was, because we were talking about tapes and this thing I was doing, and she was kind of interested. She's a poet. And I said, well, let's talk and stand in front of this window, because I knew I'd get this nice silhouette. It was getting dark, and I was just like, oh, let's just see what happens. And I was kind of moved by what she said here.
It was all on the tape, it was all on the tape. And then when it was over, I decided to listen to it.
I think this was similar to a way I might work with some actors in the future, or non-actors necessarily. Just someone I thought was interesting and had something to say that, you know, I would just kind of work around them or their ideas, try to incorporate that into what I was doing. It was fun to try to explore, you know. I wouldn't do anything else, you know. It was like a good foundation to what I would try to be doing later. But at the time, I didn't know there'd be a later. I really thought this would be the only film I ever made, quite possibly. And if so, that I wanted to, you know, just be honest with myself and go, oh, I made a film once. You know, I'd be older going, I made the film once. And, you know, that was my life at that time. I think if I hadn't had the outlet, you know, of film, I would have been probably in more trouble on a lot of levels. If I wouldn't have found cinema and been really obsessed with that, or, you know, thinking I could make films, or that was my outlet. You know, that was a good, safe place to put all your energy. And it's a good place because it requires all your energy and everything you might possibly have. I remember also in this movie actively wanting to depict like the modern mechanized view. Like there's so many times he's getting things from machines, whether it's food or his ticket to get onto the train, or it's like, you know, getting money out of a machine, or just wanting to show kind of the modern mechanization, I guess, of life. That was, you know, we're kind of interacting with machines. It was some, you know, it would have seemed like science fiction 100 years before, just how much of your daily life is from interactions with non-human elements. The guy on the right also is in Slacker, Keith McCormick, who was a roommate of, he moved in with Lee and I at some point. I had a alternative ending here, that after that there was one more scene after this, that I finished the movie, and it was, I don't know, this whole gun thing, it was like he pays, or I don't know, it was kind of taken from Bresson's The Devil Probably, a film I hadn't even seen at that time. He goes out and like he's with some guy, and the guy like shoots him, and he falls dead. And I did that initially, but then I thought, no, that's an intellectual construct that wasn't true to really what I was feeling at all, or anywhere near. I mean, what I was really saying is this banality stuff isn't so bad. Like, that's life. It's not like, you know, worth killing yourself over or killing somebody or anything. Like, hey, what the hell? This is just life as it unfolded in some way. It didn't really need anything big like that. So often in filmmaking, you're confronted with that idea to sort of sum it all up with something big. And I think the Pressure and Slacker was similar, to bring the character, the guy at the very beginning, back and make a bigger statement or some kind of conclusive circular form to it. And I remember thinking, like, nah, just go all the way with it. You know, don't make it simple. Don't create simple closure. That's kind of easy. Or it kind of explains away too much. You know, it kind of renders everything before it more simple than it really is. So I didn't really want to do that either. So ending movies is pretty tough.